We're now on to the painting phase of the Airfix Tiger, Tiger 1. So yeah, we've just got these little pots of paint, and basically what happens is people try to slap these on in one go. There's no instructions in here telling you about how to really use the paints. So what I've done is I have given this a bit of a wipe over with some isopropyl alcohol. I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but I thought I'll give it a go. And it just hopefully gets rid of any grease, fingertips. Not essential. You could just give it a wipe over with, or even wash the screws before you even start, just with some washing up liquid, and let them dry off. It just helps everything go on. Now what would normally happen is I would put a primer on. So I'd normally use this an airbrush, and a primer could be with different types of primers, basically just putting a base coat on there. I'm not going to do that because the primer didn't come with the kit. What you could do is go to Halfords or a car shop and get some primer that you put on a car. So we could do that, but actually what I'm going to do is, again, this doesn't come with it, I'm just going to use these paints. So I'm going to start off with this one, which is the little tub of 94. That's because everything is all covered in here. I'm just going to give it a thin coat of this. Now let's open this up and see what we're going to be dealing with in here. Okay, so it doesn't look too good. What we'll do is to use actually some sprue. So I'm just use part of that as a stirrer. So as you can see, even with a stir, it's quite lumpy, and what would happen is people would give this a bit of a mix and then get the brush in there and try to literally slap that on. You can see it's a lumpy. You're going to smear that in, and it's going to cover, not so much probably bad on here because it's quite a smooth surface, but something like with an aircraft, that's going to be literally getting in all the little panel lines and all those little recesses that give it the detail. And as you can see, it's all quite thick and horrible. Now what would normally happen is I could use some sort of primer, not a primer, thinners. There's all sorts of types of thinners that are probably working here, but I'm assuming that you're not going to have that, so I've just got literally a bottle of tap water, and I'll take a little bit of this again because I could use different types of thinners. So just pop some of that in the cap and just use this to literally fill it up pretty much to the brim with water. So again, that's nothing special about that, literally just from the tap. And stir this in, and we're going to, I mean, already you can tell it's obviously getting thinner, and I want to get this, to be honest, as watery as I can. I'm not really looking to give it a good thick coat. Now immediately I can start seeing that it's getting a lot less lumpy. As I said, I won't be putting a thick coat of this on, I'm just literally going to be smearing it on. But that's suddenly got a lot smoother. I've got some little bubbles on the top, but you can already see there that it's a lot. Oh, saying that, as I went to the bottom, there's still lumps at the bottom. Case of spending a few minutes so, yeah, still got some gloopiness to it. It makes no mention of this in the instructions. All those other, telling you literally the obvious. Doesn't tell you how to use the paints, which is the sort of critical part of it, because you can build a lovely model, but if we had done that to absolute perfection and we started slapping on that paint onto there, all those little details in there would just get lost. And especially more so with the aircraft, which have got the more finer panel lines on there. So that's about done there. out a little bit more. I don't want to pour it straight in. I'm going to spill it. Hence why I'm just using the dropper. Not essential, I'm not measuring it out. It's just because if I try to pour that in there, I'm just going to spill it all over the place, and I already am. I'll just stir that in a bit. So I'm literally right up to the brim now. And we can try and get right in the corners, right in the edges. Yeah, that's fine, that's a lot better. So we've got our brush, still quite nice and clean, so pop that in there. Gonna have to be careful not to, only want a little bit. I mean, you see people covering it, and actually I'm just going to use, just to get the brush going, I'm just going to paint a bit onto the sprue. Probably not going to see it very well. I'm just really trying to, there's that smoother side there, really just trying to get the brush a bit more conditioned, get some of that, the paint actually work it into the bristles on the brush. I can see it's really not sitting down too well on there. There we go. So that's just it getting, I mean, imagine a bit like a toothbrush. You know how a dry toothbrush always feels tougher than a toothbrush after you finish using it, once it's sort of wetted. That's what we're doing with that brush, just conditioning it a little bit. So let's start here. What we'll do is we're going to start on some areas where aren't too visible. So I'm going to just do under it where the tracks are going to go to cover this bit up. So at the moment I'm literally just slapping it on there, but I say I'm slapping it on there, as I'm slapping it on I'm then thinning it around. It's streaky, that's fine, don't worry about that. We're not trying to get a nice, not looking for an even coverage at the moment. There's going to be bits where you can see the plastic coming through. To be honest, doing this colour, probably the colour plastic probably doesn't actually show too well. But again, I'm just getting that in there. So no sort of finesse at this point at the moment, but I'm not slapping it on, as in I'm putting sort of quite a bit on there, quite haphazard, but I'm more making sure it gets coverage all over. There is some little ejection that I'm not too sure if you're going to be able to see that in here. There's some little round recess bits where there's part of the moulding process. If that was going to be where it would be visible, then we want to fill those in, but those tracks are going to be going right over there, so I'm not going to see them. So I'm really just trying to work it in. As I say, it's very streaky. I'm sure if I was doing this, if I probably should have used possibly could have used the black, would have illustrated a bit more. Once I'm doing this, I'm not looking to get perfect coverage. As I say, let it be streaky, that's fine. The main thing is to get it over. Even if it's, you can see the plastic afterwards, that's fine as long as it's had a bit of coverage. Do the bottom. So although I'm loading the brush, I'm smearing it out over a wide area. So ultimately, it's, as I said, that I've definitely put, that's definitely too thick on there. I can tell because as I'm brushing it, it's moving it around. Now this isn't really trying to paint it. I'm not, as I say, I'm using the colour paint, that will be, but don't think of this first coat as actually painting it. Think of it as just putting a base down. If you can get it smooth, then all the better. Probably rushing this a bit too much, to be honest. Probably went a bit too gung-ho to start with, especially on the bottom parts. Because once you start getting those streaks, and it is human nature just to think, no, I've got to try to neaten that up. As long as it's not thick, as long as they're thin streaks, it's okay. You don't want thick, gloopy streaks. What will happen is, with more coats, imagine the paint streaks, if you zoom in, there'd be lots of little ridges. The second coat and third coat will actually start filling in those little ridges. That's how those ridges will sort of dissipate. Now remember, I've taken the, I didn't actually sort of glue them in place, the exhaust covers, so they are here. I'll be doing those separately because I need to paint the exhausts and then put the covers on. The exhaust will actually be the metallic colour, but again we're just covering it in this to prime it. Literally this coat is just a layer. Eventually, don't think this is a coat of paint, think of it as a layer between the plastic and the paint. It just by coincidence happens to be the same colour as the paint we're using, or actually is the paint we're using. I've done that too thick. Now if this was a larger scale, I mean what we could do is actually some of these details on here, like the little what was it? Cutters, there's a little spade, shovel, that sort of thing, that could have been filed off. We could add them afterwards on aftermarket, or if it was a larger scale kit, it would tend to be added on afterwards, which would make it easier for painting. Now we're getting to this rear part here with the grills. Again, what would be happening is if we weren't actually going to be watering down the paint and trying to do it all in one session, then that gloopiness would start getting into those grills. So what we're doing is just trying to put it on thinly. Actually just trying to work it in. Okay, unfortunately, due to the colours I'm using and the colour of the plastic, it's probably not showing up massively, but it is doing it a little. So these are the exhausts, where the exhaust covers, so a bit on the inside, and then just remember it doesn't have to be too neat, as long as it's thin. At this stage, thinness beats neatness. Again, I've also given this a wipe over with the Isopropyl Alcohol. Again, just took off any layer of grease in the manufacturing process. It sort of covered, the insides of the moulds are covered with what's known as a release agent, basically a non-stick sort of grease, so that the plastic doesn't stick to the mould. A bit like if you're making a cake, I guess. You put a bit of butter around the tin first, so your cooking doesn't stick in. But by that nature, it's a non-stick greasy agent, and normally, to be honest, I don't tend to worry about that too much, because if I'm priming, I will use what's known as a hot primer, basically an enamel or a solvent based primer, which will sort of dissolve any sort of greasy sort of residues and fingerprints and those sort of things when it goes down. That gives them the nice smooth finish to put the paint over, but I'm not doing that with this kit. So therefore, anything I can do to give me an advantage with this, okay. Just trying to thin it down. That's fine there, and finally the tracks. These I'm going to use all of this with the same paint, even though this is going to be, the tracks themselves are going to be the dark iron colour, and the wheels, which I'm putting a bit of paint on there, the wheels themselves will be, what colour will the wheels be? There'll be the rubber on the wheels have actually got solid rubber tyres on, so they will need to be black. So the wheels themselves will be this light brown beigey colour. At the moment, I'm just trying to work this in to the inside of the tracks and the wheels. In fact, as I'm putting the paint on there, I'm seeing that even though this is on the inside and therefore won't actually be seen, they have actually still got rivets on the inside of those wheels. Trying to get the paint in those little crevices. Again, I don't know how much this is actually going to be seen. And this is the tricky bit, it's getting the paint in the gaps between the links. Just really working it in. The good thing is with this is that you do start seeing little tabs on there whereabouts it was come off the sprue. Although it was they were cut off the sprue gates were then filed down. You can still see the lighter bits of plastic whereabouts they were. But at least getting a primer on there, it kind of covers those up. It's a little bit messy, this. So I don't know if you can see there's a little white lighter bit there. Again, that was where it had come off the sprue gate and been filed down. And although I'm painting this the light brown colour, it will of course have those darker colours going on top, but it should need less coats of that. Now what I'm not too keen on is there is a massive, and this is the problem with using these as opposed to the little link and length bits which were done individually. This track doesn't have a join because it was joined on the links, whereas here we do have a big line running down, and unfortunately there's not much I can do about that. The only thing I'm going to know is that it's going to be a bit hidden under there, so it's not going to be so obvious. It's not so bad on the bottom, but along the top there is quite a big join. Probably putting on a bit for the tracks themselves. I'm probably putting a bit more on the brush than what I normally would do, but that's so I can then work it in between the links. Essentially what I don't want to do is to see any bare plastic, because if I don't do it on this, actually there's a bit of a stippling to get it in there as well. So if I don't do it on this, then when I actually put the iron on there, the darker colour, that then won't work its way into the gaps, and then what would happen is you'd end up with these black links, but you'd actually have you'd see the light brown plastic between them, which is not a good look. It does also seem like my paints really, if I had much more to do with this, I should really give it another mix. I think quite a lot of the pigment started to drop to the bottom. I'm getting more water than paint, or even more water than paint than what it was to start off with. And of course, being very thin and very watery, I can stipple it in, and I can basically, I'm forcing it down between those links. Let's just put a bit more on those sides whereabouts I was holding, and just manage to, that's why it's over my fingers. and if it hadn't been, it would be too thick to really do that. I'll be just splodging it on, and it, you know, it really wouldn't be settling into those gaps between the links. So that's fine. I say, remember, it doesn't have to be perfect. So hopefully you can see as well, is the brush is still looking quite clean actually there. I will give it a, so actually I just do that, you can see that I've hardly got any, well, that was, ignore that bit, that was where I just rested, that's just me cleaning the brush there. You can see there's not much on that. I will give it a little dash of water in a minute just to clean it, but I always find it odd when people have got those mugs full up of anything, you know, you fill up water and you put it in there and you're shaking it around. Actually, you shouldn't ever need to do that with the brush, to actually, you know, just literally just actually what I could do is show you here. So I've got the bottle of water, just using that cap, pop some, literally I'll just pop a little bit of that in there. Let's just pop the lid on there, and all the other paints will be thinned to that sort of consistency as well. What I'll do is just pop a bit of that. You can see, so even though I was, you know, spludging it all over, it's very watery. I'm literally, you can see that now I've got a clean brush. That's just water I'm now brushing on there. So that's now clean. That's good. I'll actually need to put that back in there. That's pretty much clean. So this is just a bottle of tap water that I've had kicking around for months. And actually, if we just look at what I've just been painting, to be honest, actually on the side I'm going to have to sort of do some photos. I'll drop some photos in here. The side bits I can see some of the brush strokes, but on the top deck there's a few brush strokes where it went down a little bit thick actually. I put a bit too much on when I was trying to work my way around where that shovel is, and I sort of splurged it on, and then I was, yeah, taking it off. And on the bottom as well, I can see the direction of where the paint strokes were. It's got quite a smoother feel to it now, but a matte sort of smooth, but you can tell it's got a layer of paint on. It's not, that doesn't feel like the plastic anymore, but it's definitely smooth. It's not enough colour, the colour's not thick enough to do that in one coat. It's not the plan. That's probably going to have a couple more coats, but what I will do now is, before I do the next layer, is to actually do a bit of shading. So let's as that's pretty much all. If this was enamels, this would still be quite wet. Let's go to the black. Okay, so I'm going to show you what I'll do. So again, we'll get a bit more sprue. I won't use the same part. And again, put some water just in there. I'll just leave the cap of water there. So again, not filling it right up to the top. I should have started the stirring process first, I just remembered. That would have been, I should have just actually started getting it agitated with the sprue first. Just because that water just sat right on the top. So I haven't filled it right the way up. Just to give me a bit of, if I fill it right the way up, it'll be a lot more trickier to stir to get those initial lumps out. Actually, this one does seem to be a bit thinner from the get-go. There's still lumps in there, but not the lumps that there was. So again, a bit more water. There we go, so I filled it up to the top. Now what I want to do is, I'm going to use this to highlight, or basically to pre-shade, as in add shadows. So before I put on the final coat, or coats, let's actually give this, take some of the excess off there. So let's first of all come to the insides of the exhausts. So this is going to be getting painted, and the bits that I'm about to paint now aren't going to be doing this. The bits that I'm painting now are going to be over painted properly with this. What I'm actually doing is I'm just effectively just going to darken these parts just on the inside. And I want this to be thin. That's going on. That was far too much. Wipe off the excess. So this is going in whereabouts the exhausts are, which is going to be darker and dirtier. Now I'm doing this roughly because this is going to be getting paint put on top. This is just so that when the paint goes on top of it, it's a darker shade because I pre-shaded it. And these grills here, we're probably going to be having a bit of a darkness to them. That's far too much. I don't want it to be solid black. There, you can see now I'm just moving it around a bit. Just to darken those areas around. Bits there. Hopefully you can kind of get the idea of what I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to cover the whole thing with it. Let's actually use a bit off of there. Sometimes the sort of like the edges. And then on the bottom parts as well, we're going to be getting in here. So I'm just going to run it, put it actually where it won't be visible, and then spread it out from there. So again, it's going to be darker under here, isn't it? If you think about it, it's going to have, not only is there going to be mud, but it's also going to be in the shade. Little parts there, going to be darker. Of course, because we're going to be putting a couple of layers of paint over this, this is really going to be muting all this down, so don't think this is final weathering. We're really just going to be adding texture to it, which is, after a couple of light coats of that light brown, is going to be losing quite a lot of this. That's the plan, at least. So actually what I'm doing is I'm just dipping in there and then wiping off, just to try to get rid of as much excess as. It's going to be a bit darker and dirtier around the bottom of the turret and around those hatches. Of course, you want to try and get a bit of black in the barrel, just so that gets some depth to it. Actually, excess of it off. A few little hatches at the back. So little corners where mud, dirt would accumulate. That's still a little bit wet there. Actually, these are going to be getting painted. I'm just putting on the wheels. No point putting it on the actual tracks or anything, because the tracks are going to be getting painted dark, or metal anyway. Really, I'm just sort of doing those external ones where, so when that has the paint put on, that's actually still a bit wet, so that's okay. And again, a lid on there, so at least those ones will just need enough to mix, and hopefully again you should see that there shouldn't really be, you know, the brush is almost pretty much clean. You know, really to have mugs that you use for cleaning brushes in, really, you know, shouldn't be needed. You should, if you're needing that, you're putting far too much paint on. You just want to get it in the bristles, not up the brush itself. So this looks really rougher now, definitely, and I'm now looking at this going, have I just balled this up completely? But hopefully we're going to be putting on another 2 or 3 thin coats of this, and that's then going to start muting that down. But hopefully you'd imagine that that's then still going to be, those areas are going to be darker than the lighter bits. So hopefully it will start adding a bit more texture, a bit more 3D-ness to it. So what I'm going to do now is just leave that. This does dry pretty quick, so in fact I could really start putting another one of those on, but no, what I want to do is just leave this now, let it cure properly, and then once it's cured properly I can then build those layers up and actually just build them thin, slowly, not slapping it on. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of help. I'll give you a bit of an idea of how that first coat goes down. It goes down thin, it goes down grainy, it's streaky, but as long as you're doing it as thin as you possibly can with thinned down paints, you'll notice that once it dries, it actually dries back and the brush strokes aren't so obvious. And what will happen with more coats going down, we really won't have any brush strokes on there at all, but it's just that patience and the trust in the process. So let's wait for this to cure and then hopefully get a second and third coat on there. So it's now time for a second coat of paint onto the Tiger. So here we are, we've got it here. So that remember, we put the first coat of that down, but that was literally not painting, that was a primer coat of that 94, just so because it's the lightest of the colours that we've got in the kit. So we put down a coat of that, which was quite thin and very watered down. Then I put on a bit of pre-shading, just using some of the black, which you can see is still looking very much like brush strokes and everything on there. And then put a second coat on the turret, and as well just on the wheels. No point doing the tracks because they're going to be getting painted. And of course we also have the exhaust covers as well. So let's give that a bit of a shake up. Just whilst I'm doing that, that does actually feel a bit smoother. That doesn't feel like plastic. Still got a bit of you can still see the brush strokes in there, but ideally I want to get this to the stage where we're not seeing the brush strokes of the pre-shading, more of just a hint of that darker areas. So just try to carefully take this lid off. So that's just a case of getting a little bit on the brush. We're not completely loading the brush up. In fact, if you can see, the paint's not gone all the way up to the top. We've still only got just over half of it on there. So as ever, I'll start on the bottom. And again, we're just trying to put on thin coats. And as you can see, this is going on. Hopefully you can see. I probably should change the direction I'm doing this a bit. Just try to infill. Yeah, really, I'll just put it on lightly. And what will sort of happen is, hopefully, on the sort of microscopic level, it will start trying to settle into the little grooves that have been left by the previous brush strokes. That's essentially what I'm trying to do here. So it builds up that colour layer, but slowly it will build up and just sort of smooth the actual the surface itself. I could try to achieve it quite quickly by putting on thick coats, but better to do a few thinner coats. Of course, this would have been easier to have used an airbrush, prime it, and use the airbrush to pre-shade it, and then a few coats, but I want to just use the bits that people would have in their house if they were to have got this for Christmas or birthday. Might be able to see the little bit difference. That's definitely knocked down the black isn't as prominent there as what it is on there, where that's only had one coat. That's now had a second coat over, although the paint's a little bit thick in areas. I mean, I am sort of rushing these under the side skirts because, to be honest, the tracks are going to be covering it, but we still obviously want to make sure that there's paint on there, and a little bit of the shadowing from the pre-shading. That's really adding in. So when you do look at the completed model, it will appear darker underneath than it does on top, which of course it would do naturally because the light would normally fall from the sun onto the top of it. I know the brush strokes are also going this way, but also if you think about it, that's also the way, well, when it's going over, it would actually, anything it's going over would sort of naturally streak in that direction as well. So again, we've still got the sort of darker bits. It is, at this moment in time, still obviously brush strokes. By building up these layers is just going to mute that back, and that defined edge of the brush stroke is going to then start getting lost. And it will just be a darker patch. which we're starting to get to now. So hopefully you can see I'm not loading the brush up. I'm not chucking loads all over it, I'm just moving it up slowly, and those darker patches on the side are pretty much going now. What I might try to do as well, I'm getting ahead of myself, is once we've got three, probably it's going to need, for sure, it's definitely going to need at least a third layer of paint. We'll see how that goes, but it's definitely going to need that third layer on there. But once we have got it painted, might try and do a very watered down black, and then see if I can use it as a wash to sort of highlight bits and put some weathering into it as well. In fact, I might even be able to combine a black with a bit of this light brown to make a more darker brown. See if I could use it for a bit of a more muddy effect rather than just using pure black, which might be a bit too stark. You can see we're now starting to cover up that pre-shading. One of the reasons we want to do thin coats as well is because we want to make sure we only put enough on that's needed. Once you put the paint on, it's of course harder to take it off, so here it gives us the opportunity to build it up in thinner layers. Rear part. Now the exhaust stacks themselves will be getting painted with the iron colour. So that is a sort of darker colour, so in theory I could just sort of cover it all in this one, but if I can leave it a bit darker with that, the black pre-shading under it, it will mean that the metallic colour going on there will sit a bit better on there. Right, so we've really knocked that back. I'm not too sure how well it's actually showing on the camera there, but we have knocked that back, but it's still obvious that those are brush strokes, just not dark. I mean, I'm thinking that one more coat will hopefully be enough. Before I forget, I'm going to do these, then we've got to do the inside. Actually, I probably won't do the inside because I've already given the inside one coat, and then that's going to be darker because that's whereabouts the exhaust is. I just want to make sure that the exterior part is painted. Effectively what happens with this is we're making it so it's bar the pre-shading, making it look pristine, and then putting our weathering on it. Now the turret, I mean, it was a bit heavy-handed going around here, especially with that, you know, part on the side, and that is clearly a large brush stroke. We're building up this lighter on top. Admittedly, this part might need a bit more. So that's definitely the weak spot of my pre-shading on that side of the turret. Admittedly, I'm being a little bit rough and ready with it, but it is a tank after all. If we attempt this again with another starter kit, I'll do an aircraft, which will have a bit more of a camouflage scheme on, and probably will require some masking as well, and definitely some contrasting colours. But I'll admit this, in hindsight, doing it with this Tiger tank, which is pretty much all in one colour, the black and the iron colours are pretty much just for adding details on, and of course the tracks. But 90% of the colour you're going to see on this model is going to be this brown. I want to keep my paint on the outside of that barrel, because I'd got some of the paint inside just to make that a bit more obvious that those ends are open. And finally, just going to pop a bit of paint on the wheels that are in here. Each of these wheels will have black on them because they actually do have rubber on there. In real life, these wheels, I think it obviously just makes it a bit more quieter and a bit more smoother. And that sprocket. And once those are painted, I had put the pre-shading on there, and once these are actually, the tracks have got the paint on and done, then of course I will hit them with some weathering as well. And that's where we're going to be trying to use the black and this brown to make a darker brown, to make it a mud. Hopefully that will work, because of course I can only use the paints that I've got in here, so I'll try to knock up one which is going to be a bit more of a mud, and then do another one which is a bit more of a wash, a weathering panel wash. So that will highlight the details, for example the grills, that sort of thing, and sort of rivets. Just on the back here. I don't think these are really going to be visible, but we want to get them done anyway. In fact, by adding a wash and detailing, it might actually make it stand out a little bit more, so if the model is picked up and turned over, these sort of details would actually then stand out. Just add sort of like shading and shadow. For now, we've just got that light brown on there, so I think for the moment everything that needed with a light brown. I mean, it is a shame that they've done such a similar, they've matched the plastic almost similar to the colour of the paint that we're using, but we are starting to get rid of these more obvious shades. Tiger's, I think, now had 3 coats of paint, 4 if you include the primer, and so I've kind of just stuck it together. Well, it's not actually glued, it's just sort of placed in the turret's just on there, and I've pushed, those were push fit anyway, just to kind of see what it looks like. But it's still looking, yeah, got that pre-shading coming through, but I've got to admit it's still looking a bit like there's black brush marks that have been painted over. So I think one more coat. This so far has had 4 coats of this 94 acrylic paint that's been thinned down, and although it's had 4 coats, all the detail is still perfectly visible. It doesn't look like, you know, we haven't got detail filling up or paint filling up any of these little vents. It's not clogging around any areas. Still all the rivets, all the detail on the back, those can come off as well. When you look on here around the hatches, all those little fine bits of detail are all still perfectly visible. So it's not like, you know, trying to cover up. Sometimes, you know, people put this on without thinning it, just trying to do it all in 1 or 2 coats and start slapping it on and losing the detail. But yeah, every single little nut and bolt is still perfectly visible on the wheels and everything. So remember, this has been thinned down. So pop that off. We will give it a stir again. You can see we're almost halfway through the pot. That's probably about how much, when we opened it up, how much actually paint was actually in there. So it just illustrates how much water, you know, is added to thin it down. Some of that, and so I think work it into the bristles. Hopefully, this is now going to be the last layer on here. I know it doesn't sort of show up too well on here, but let's just start. I was going to say slapping it on, and again, just to illustrate, hopefully you can see with the brush, there's still, I mean, the paint is only going somewhere between halfway, 2/3 of the way up the brush, and this I've actually kind of loaded it up to get it going on the bottom. So now it's just going to be a case of putting the paint on and sort of thinly, and just rubbing it, I say rubbing it in, painting it in, trying to get it smooth, just trying to work it in, and it's going to be working in between maybe the gaps between the brush strokes from the previous ones. I'm being a little bit more slapdash on the bottom because that's not really going to be seen, but I do just want to make sure that it's not obvious brush strokes, and as I say every time I do this, underneath and these side skirts are going to be covered up by the tracks and the running wheels. But we do want to make sure that when viewed, it's still going to be from different angles, it's still going to have that sort of darker shading on the bottom, because that will be more naturally in the shadow. Yes, I will admit these side bits aren't getting the care and attention, the finesse to details, probably the best way to put it, that the upper sections will have. I'm probably putting on a little bit thick as well, and as I'm doing it I'm sort of always going in the same direction, so there's going to probably be brush marks slightly visible, but only slightly. Right, this pre-shading that I've put on the top is pretty much disappearing. Whether it's going to be visible on this camera or not is debatable. But as I say as well, one of the things with pre-shading and putting on thin coats is that it's better to put on the thin coats, because you can slowly, exactly as I'm doing, is build up the layers. If I try to do this in thicker coats and put too much on, then once that pre-shading goes, it's gone. It's building up slowly. I'm in more control of how much paint is going on top. But going back to what I was saying about that, is it's making it less obvious that the pre-shading was on there. It's now just sort of more having a more mottled effect. Just it's more just making some of the parts darker. And as you can see, I'm just putting a little bit on the brush and actually just trying to take the excess off. Working away around these vents. I don't mind just brushing over the top and leaving the dark pre-shading actually in the gaps between the grills. And of course what will happen, and I know I keep saying this as well, is as the paint dries, it does lighten a little bit, it does thin as the water sort of dries out of it. So it sort of tends to happen, pre-shading will tend to show a little bit more through. But it's tricky to judge it until it has actually dried. Once we know that most of this has been painted with the brown, we can then start doing the other parts of it, using the black and the iron colour, start getting the tracks, tyres and the other little bits on top painted. Okay, that I would say is about done for that. Those are pretty much looking quite solid colour, but I will, just for completeness, make sure they all have the same number of coats. They only have one or two coats on the inside, so they're going to look a bit more darker, whereas the exhausts actually are, so they're a bit more darker and dirtier in there. Let's get the turret done, and one of the main bits on this turret was where I'd overdone, well, it was meant to be pre-shading, but it ended up just being a big smear of black. And now, I think this final coat is now just taking that, knocked it right way back now. It says on here that I should actually be using the 53 on the track, which I will be, but I'm going to be darkening it first of all, just with some black. But now what I'll be doing is getting the black to get in all the little gaps between tracks, individual links. So then it's got a darker base, and then we can use that lighter colour on top. It'll just give it a bit more, it'll give it more depth, more, give it a bit more weight. Whereas before, when I was painting some of these bits, I was saying about how little I put on the brush. Here, I'm, how should we say, being a bit more generous, but it's because I'm having to work it in between. I've also got to try to be careful. I've just gone over a little bit on the back, that's should be fine, but I just got to make sure. And this is actually a lot easier to do, to work it in between the gaps when it's been thinned and mixed properly. If it's thick, you really, you know, if you just sort of try to use the paint as is. Okay, I'm going to actually, the next bit, I'm going to try to illustrate what I'll be doing, but in reverse. So, imagine this bit that I'm about to paint has already been painted black, and instead of having black on here, I'm now going to be putting on the metallic colour. What I'm going to be doing when I do the metallic is more going to be painting it like this, which you can see doesn't get into the recesses. So this is why I wanted to put the black on, because if that was the silver that I just put on, then what would happen is by having the black in the little gaps between the links, the silver is going to be on the top, and that's going to show a bit more wear, and it's also just going to add more of the depth. So that's going to be the technique that I'm going to be using, which is why I want to put this black on first. I should have done that a bit more carefully. I'm just going a bit over, a bit exuberant with it. I'm running out of places to hold. Pop that down there and finish that off. So again, that sort of illustrate, you know, that's going to be what I'm going to be the look that I'm going to be going for. And once we're happy we've got a nice good solid black base. Now, our main priority is to get the paint between the links. And then having to use the brush almost to stipple it in there. Okay, we'll neaten this up in a bit. What I will also do is need to pick out a few little details on here just for now, and again, like with the tracks, the bits that are going to be metallic, So, the little machine gun that's poking out the front. So I'm just going to get some black on first of all. A few other little bits and pieces on here. So you can see we've got a little shovel, a little phone, some of these little bits, and that's what we're going to want to get it on, as well as on the exhaust. And of course this is all showing it's actually 53, but we're using this black as the base coat. What I want to do, because I've just been slapping that on, I'm just going to recondition the brush a bit, actually even give it a bit of a wash, just because I don't want it absolutely loaded up with paint. It's going to be a little bit more delicate now. Literally just a little, the smallest blob of paint. We're going to start popping some paint over on this shovel. The raised detail, and literally just trying to drag it the minimum amount as I can. Creating the base coats for the metallic colour. The main thing is I don't want it to go down into the edges. Had a bit too much come over, so I've just got a bit of a cocktail stick, and I'll just try and use the cocktail stick just to clean off that cocktail stick. So use that for glue. Okay, so it's had a take off some of the excess that just went over a little bit. Well, we got a shovel. Got some bolt cutters. There's a few other little bits of detail on here. Drag the brush over. I think instead of trying to we're going to have to do this and build up the layers of this. And then use the metallic to highlight it. Take off the excess. Got to remember, I'm not aiming. This isn't the final coat of this. I'm just getting a bit of a thinner layer down just to work on. And we can build it up. back is these exhausts. So again, those will be getting a metallic colour. First off, let's get a bit of the black on, and then we can shade it with the metallic colour. Details on here. Nope, they're fine for now. Just work on the outside of these tracks. To do the insides in a bit. I'll wait for the outsides to dry, the bit that I'm doing now. When I say the insides, I mean actually the basically the inside bit of the track where it's on the wheels, and also painting the black rims, the tyres. That's when it's dry, just for ease of handling. Okay, so I've got mucky fingers. I really should have stopped and cleaned my fingers. Those bits don't actually look too neat at the moment. I'm more just putting on the black of the base coat. I'm going to have to get where I've went a bit over. I did try to hoof it off with a bit of a cocktail stick, but I think I'm going to need to, once that's painted, is then just get a bit more of this one, just to sort of go over the bits where it's overgone. But I think what doesn't also help either is trying to stipple the brush into the tracks. I don't know if this is going to be obvious there, but the brush has almost got a bit of a fork to it. Yeah, it's kind of separated into two bits, which doesn't make it very easy for when obviously I've sort of split it. It doesn't make it easy for getting onto those smaller parts when you've actually got two tips. But what we're going to do is wait for these tracks to dry and then start going in and doing the inside bits of them, and then actually sort of painting a bit of black around the rims as well of the tyres, and then use the metallic to then go over the black, really to sort of be highlighting it. I'll show you what I mean when I do it actually, and any of the other details. And then of course going to need to get a bit more of probably the brown again, just to go over the bits where it's gone over to neaten it up, and it's going to be that bit of a battle. But for now I think just let that dry properly, because if I start trying to pick it up and start doing the fine bits, I'm going to be getting more paint on my fingers and more paint in bits where I don't want it. So yeah, let's just, one of the things with modelling, knowing when just to stop, when to sit back and let the paint dry. So yeah, catch you later.